What's going on, everybody? I'm Patrick from POWLAX, and today I'm going to be discussing the pros, cons, and my overall thoughts on StringKing Type 2X, StringKing Type 2S, and Epic's Otter Mesh. To start off, let's talk about all the similarities. The first thing is they're all manufactured by StringKing. I'm pretty sure that they're all manufactured with StringKing's patent pending weave, and they're all made from materials that are not going to contract or expand when they get wet, cold, or hot, which is pretty cool. So what's the big deal about a mesh that won't expand or contract when they get wet or hot or whatever? Back before the whole wax mesh revolution, there was pretty much soft mesh or hard mesh, and so soft mesh was really flimsy, and if it ever got wet it would contract and you would end up having more whip and it would be inconsistent. Hard mesh was pretty much the same as soft mesh, it just had a coating over it, and then when you kind of broke through the coating it became softer, but it would still expand or contract when it got wet. So that was a pretty big problem, especially if you're playing somewhere, pretty much anywhere that has wetness, which is pretty much everywhere. But so really wasn't a good deal that they were all bagging out. So to combat this problem, in comes wax mesh. And so wax was used in the year 500, so 1500 years ago, to waterproof important documents, prevent them from staining, and ever since has been used as a really good waterproofing agent. So Laxers, the smart people that we are, we decide, hey, we're going to use this exact same technology and we are going to try and waterproof our mesh. The only problem is that wax has a very big, heat gradient, so when it gets really hot it can get a little pliable, and when it gets really cold it can get really hard. So this is why POWLAX offers three separate types of waxed mesh. The first is POWLAX mesh, which is a bit harder, and then titanium mesh, which is made to be a bit softer, perfect for Fogos, and will be, you'll be able to use it in, single digit cold. Then you have striker mesh, which is kind of a mid-range of the two and also has the black runners going up it. But so all of these meshes are pretty much base soft meshes, so they will have that same expansion and retention. It's just that they have a weather-resistant coating. But even with the coating, it'll still have some give to it just because of how the fibers are running together. But so keep that in mind as we kind of move forward. So in comes StringKing, and they say, we're going to make this mesh out of extremely strong material, and we're going to weave it really well so that we're going to have a mesh that won't have the expansion and contraction of hard or soft mesh, and we're also not going to have the problem of the stiffening and kind of melting of the wax meshes. Don't get me wrong, if you're out playing in really cold weather and StringKing gets wet, water will fill those fibers. The fibers just won't expand. So if the water freezes inside of the StringKing mesh, it will still stiffen up a bit, but in theory, the mesh itself is not expanding and contracting like it would with hard or soft mesh. So then if you add wax mesh into that same situation, water can still get on the outside of the mesh and freeze and make it stiffen up. It's just not getting into the fibers. So these are actually all StringKing Type 2S. That's because I got a couple orders in. They all look distinctly different. I'm showing off my custom designs. So if you would like a custom StringKing Otter Mesh piece of mesh, you guys can head over to POWLAX.com and shoot me an email through the custom mesh page, or order it from the StringKing mesh page on POWLAX.com. So about these meshes, first we have StringKing Type 2X, which is advertised as a semi-hard type of mesh. It actually breaks in to be about the same as the old POWLAX semi-hard when it's all broken in. But so I really wouldn't even put it at the semi-hard. I would almost say I'd feel it's on more of the softer version. But so then you have StringKing Type 2S, which is definitely a soft mesh once it gets all broken in. And then you have Epic's Otter Mesh, which is really what I would call an ultra soft mesh. It is absolutely ridiculously soft. All of these meshes have a short break-in period, and the break-in is due to the mesh attached to the head, not the mesh itself. So if I take my stallion here with POWLAX striker switch shooter mesh and I push out on it, some of this variance is going to be due to the mesh actually expanding with the pressure and not the stringing. With StringKing mesh, it's all related to the stringing onto the head. So that's a pretty big difference between all soft, hard, and wax meshes and then StringKing and Otter mesh. So as a lacrosse coach and a lacrosse connoisseur, I'm always very interested in what players are going to put into their stick. I'm not going to sit by and watch a player drop a bunch of very catchable passes because they do not have a well-strung stick or they chose a mesh that just doesn't suit their individual play. I really don't care what kind of mesh that they put in their stick, but if they're hurting the team because they just didn't think that they should have a stick strung by someone who knows what they're doing, it's really just an unacceptable reason to drop a pass or lose a game. It's completely unacceptable. I know I was watching one of the Duke videos one time, and apparently, John Danowski told a story about Bill Tierney throwing away an entire team's sticks or cutting the mesh out of every single stick because they didn't have sticks that were playable. And I am the exact same way. I'll even heckle players that play for me because they don't have a stick that suits their type of play. So as I've watched a ton of players play with StringKing and Otter mesh, and I've played with them all myself, here are some of my findings with these meshes. So Epic's Otter mesh delivers on all of its promises. It's really a great mesh. It is light, it won't bag out, and it is absolutely incredibly soft. But so it's also my least favorite, and here's kind of why. But so I feel like it's just too soft and flimsy. So as I'm watching players who are starting to play with Otter mesh, they'll show me their stick, it's strung pretty well, and then over the course of 2 or 3 practices, they end up adding a ton of whip to their stick, and I'm kind of thinking to myself, the mesh doesn't change. So it's actually not the mesh's fault that a lot of these sticks are becoming inconsistent. It's really the stringer's fault. But if you think about it, it's kind of both, because if you have a mesh that won't change but is extremely flimsy and soft, it's really hard to get all of the inconsistencies out with just your sidewalls. You have to be a very, very, very good stringer to be able to put a sidewall in that won't shift because of how flimsy the mesh is. So because of how flimsy the mesh is, it's definitely my number 3. But so if you really like Otter mesh, I definitely recommend having it strung by an expert stringer who's been stringing for over 5 years, because there's just too much variance in the flimsiness of the mesh. Moving on to StringKing Type 2S. This one is designed with a backside switch shooter pattern. But so StringKing Type 2S is the most popular StringKing mesh that has been on, for my experiences, at POWLAX.com. And so I think about 80% of the StringKing that has been purchased from me has been Type 2S. And it is just like it's advertised. It is unchanging, and it is a semi-soft mesh, but I still feel that it has the same problem as the Epic's Otter mesh. Just not really as much, because it's a little bit firmer. So you're going to get a little bit less of that flimsiness. But I still find that when the players that I've watched have had it strung with this, they will develop that little bit of whip over time. It's just the fact that the added little bit of stability gives the stringers a little bit more leeway in how they're stringing their pockets, because it won't shift so much because of the flimsiness. Moving on, we've got StringKing Type 2X, and this is my favorite of the 3, and this one is designed with the switch shooter pattern that will be strung in so that just the tail of the stick has the switch shooter pattern. I thought this was an awesome idea from Pipe Crusher, and I cannot wait to see how Spawn of Peepo strings it up. But so, this is my favorite of the 3, because I think it limits that sidewall stringing problem the most of all. It's going to be the firmest of the 3. I definitely would not consider it a semi-hard mesh. I think it's just a little bit harder than the 2S, but I don't really feel like this would be classified as a harder mesh. As it breaks in, this one is 2X, and it's broken in, but I mean, it's still really soft and very pliable, which is going to give you the sway in the pocket. It's just not quite as much as the 2S. But I definitely think that it's the most consistent of the 3, because it falls falls in that line where it's just a little bit harder than the others, but it still has that good break-in feel that people like in their mesh. So with all three of these meshes in comparison to other meshes that are on the market, I definitely put these right under any wax mesh that suits your guys' needs. So for instance, POWLAX titanium mesh is what I'm using now, and it's a semi-soft mesh that gets to be about as hard as the 2X, which is this one. And the thing that really makes me like it more is that it actually does have a little bit of give. So when I'm catching a pass, the mesh will give a little bit. I like to have my sidewalls really tight, and so when they're really tight and the mesh doesn't give it all, as I'm catching, you really feel that. You really feel it hit your stick, and I prefer a more fluid catching. I would rather have my mesh have a little bit of give than just be kind of solid when it hits it. Last thing I kind of want to reiterate is that I definitely think that a lot of players should have their sticks custom strung by a professional, and that's not to say that I want you to stop stringing sticks. It's more so get a gamer that is just absolutely awesome, strung by someone who is a professional, and string and mess around with all of your backup sticks. One of my biggest things that I did in high school is I restrung all of my sticks all of the time, and it was definitely inconsistent. I look back on it now and I'm like, what the hell was I doing? Why was I restringing my gamer when I should have been restringing some other stick, and maybe that would become my gamer? But so I would definitely have your stick strung by someone who's a professional. Some of the people who I would definitely go to are myself, mainly mesh Chris and Sam, Matt from Shore Strings, Sam Ferguson from Lacrosse Stringing, and Riley from High Strung Lacrosse, and Philip from Spawn of Peepo. Those are all people who are definitely willing to string your stick for a fee, but your stick is going to be much better than if you were just trying to learn. If you want to learn on a backup. If you want to play and play well, have a gamer strung up by a professional. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'd love to hear what you guys thought down in the comments section. Definitely remember to like and subscribe, and to take a little line from Tom at Red Star Lax. Be great to each other. Have a great week, and I will see you guys in the new year in the next video.